That's the way I see it.
That's where I see it.
That's the way I see it.
That's the way I see it.
That's the way you see it.
That's the way I see it.
That's the way I see it.
That's the way I see it.
That's why I see it.
Welcome to this episode of The Way I See It. I'm your host, Austin Darga. On today's episode, we'll be talking to professional storyteller Jen Strauss. I'm really excited for you to hear her journey on how she has helped people thrive through the power of story. Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to have on the podcast today storyteller, speaker, and narrative coach Jen Strauss. In 1993, Jen left classroom teaching to create her own business, Stories Be Told, and to pursue her career as a professional storyteller. Since then, she is now enriching over 300 audiences per year with storytelling performances, workshops, training, narrative coaching, and so much more. So, without further ado, let's please welcome the legendary Jen Strauss to The Way I See It. Jen, I'm so excited to have you here. It's an honor and a pleasure. How are you today?
I'm so good, Austin, and I am so honored to be asked to be on your podcast. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure for sure. And we definitely have a lot of awesome stuff to dive into today. But first off, now that you are making a living doing storytelling and helping other people tell their stories and share their stories, could you explain to my audience a little bit more about how you got into professional storytelling? Like what led you to this career path and this journey?
All right. My very first career was in environmental education. So I taught in an outdoor classroom, and our job was to teach students about the earth and how it worked and all the creatures that we share this planet with. And it was science-based, but I found that if I shared stories with my students about the animals and the plants that share this planet and how all the natural resources work, that they would then build a caring file folder in their brain that they could then gather the scientific information in a different way because they had an emotional relationship with the stories. So I left the environmental world and went into the classroom for 8 years. And I taught second grade for 2 years, but the rest of that time was in a sixth grade classroom. And it was the last group of sixth graders that caused me to take a whole new career path because they very early in the year told me that they didn't want to read and they didn't want to write. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And they wanted to know what I was going to do about that. So they challenged me. And I went home the night after they challenged me, wondering what I was going to do to help them fall in love with language and fall in love with learning and reading. And a little light bulb went on from those environmental days. Story. So the next morning after lunch count and attendance, I looked out at this often wild group of sixth graders and I said, I'm going to tell you a story. And one of the students said, should we go down to the first grade and get our carpet squares? And I said, no, it's not going to be a first grade story. It's going to be a sixth grade story. And that morning, I told a somewhat gruesome story because they were 12-year-olds and I needed to get a hold of them. And this classroom quieted down and their heads and eyes were facing me. Shoulders dropped and mouths opened and everybody was quiet because they were lost in the story. Well, I saw that it worked. And in those days, I didn't know why it was working. I just knew that this classroom was responding. So every morning after that, for a half a year, I told a story. And it had everything to do with the curriculum that we were going to be studying later in the day. And they started to make those connections. And about halfway through the year, a group of them came up to me and said, can we do it? And I said, what do you want to do? They said, we want to be storytellers. I said, really? And they said, yeah, we've been listening to you all year and we're kind of sick of that. Weren't they wonderful? And I said, yes, we can do this. So we started telling stories. Now, this was the group that didn't want to write. So I got them telling stories about all the different things that had happened in their lives. We started very small with do you remember a time you lost a tooth? Do you remember the day you learned how to ride a two-wheel bicycle? Do you remember the day that you got a pet or lost a pet? And we told those stories. So they would tell those stories to each other and then they'd look up at me and say, do we have to write them down? And I'd say, nope, you don't like writing. Well, we went on with storytelling for a couple of months when one day I asked them if they had a favorite story, and most of them did. Mm-hmm. And I said, you have to go and tell that story 5 times to 5 different people and then come back and tell me when you've done that. And after they had done that, I said, I want you to go write it down. They didn't complain. They didn't whine. They knew that story so well because they had lived it and they had told it so many times that they knew exactly where to begin. They knew what details to put in and they knew where it needed to end. So that's when we started writing. And by the end of the year, they had taken their first language of storytelling and used it to turn themselves into writers. And at the end of that year, inspired by what happened in that classroom, I quit my job. And they didn't understand what I was doing, but I told them that they had inspired me to see that storytelling is the way that we make our way in the world. It's the way that we can embrace the things that have happened to us in our lives, and then eventually, if we want to, we can use storytelling to help us become better writers. So I quit my teaching job and started this business, and that was 33 years ago. And I still attribute my inspiration to that group of sixth graders so very, very many years ago. So that's how this all began.
Well, it really does go to show you how different people can change the world and open doors for you, whether it's a group of students or even a teacher, and that's why I started this whole platform of doing the Way I See It podcast, is because I've been inspired by many different people in my life. I have a personal story of a teacher that I had in elementary school back at Eastern Elementary who really taught me a lot about writing and, how to write sentences, paragraphs, essays. I actually gave a speech about that over a year ago at the Del Mar and shared about it on the podcast. And over time, it has really encouraged me. And then being able to do this platform with sharing my story has really inspired me to allow other people that opportunity as well. And thanks to the hard work of my producer here and everybody at Grand Traverse Industries, I'm really glad to be able to talk to people like you and other people with differing abilities to allow them that opportunity that they wouldn't otherwise get. Because, where else are you going to hear somebody who's a professional storyteller or somebody who's visually impaired working at a car dealership, unless you've heard of people like Helen Keller or Temple Grandin or Stephen Hawking. You're just not going to hear about what all these great people are doing in the world. And if it wasn't for this, I think we would have a pretty, sad society, and there definitely would not be a world of opportunity like there is now if we don't step up and provide platforms or programs or organizations that are really going to go above and beyond to help people for the better. That's definitely an amazing story, and memories definitely can be impressionable. I want to point that out as well. Whether it's good or bad, it's the ups and downs of everyday life that form you and shape you into the person that you are. I can't think of a greater message to send to everyone within the sound of our voice right now than that. So as you're listening, just going throughout your day, ponder that a little bit. Think about all of the great things that you've had throughout your life and all of your great experiences, that have brought you joy, and maybe that have also brought you hurt as well, and move forward with them and also learn from them. So do you have anything else you'd like to add on to that at all? Or?
Yeah, I wanted to share a follow-up that there was one student in that classroom who struggled more than most, but was probably the most creative student in my class. Came from a very tough home. There was quite a bit of abuse happening at home. But he was an incredible writer, and by the end of the year, he had written a story about his grandmother, who had really raised him because his mother was in one of the prison institutions in the city where I taught. And she had died the summer before, and he wrote this incredible story. So at the end of that year, the class voted on 5 of their favorite stories from the group. I sent them off to a young authors contest that was paying money. That student won the contest. I was able to hand him a check for $300 that was all his. Whoa. And something like that had never happened to him in his life. Well, years later, with technology, one day I'm on the computer, and in Messenger, up comes a message, and the student on the other side said, "Mrs. Strauss, is that you?" And I said, "It is," and I'm not going to use the student's name, but I asked if it was him, and he said, "It is." And I said, "Where are you?" He said, "I'm a photojournalist, and I live in Hawaii now. I have a beautiful wife and 2 children who love to read and write, and it's all because of you.
Oh my gosh.
So he is now 44 years old.
Wow.
And at the time that he was in my classroom, he was just turning 13. So we don't know who we're going to affect, and sometimes we don't hear back from those people, but we have to trust that if our heart's desire and our goal is to do good work in this world and help people, that those results are going to end up down the line. And we've got to hope and know that people will respond to those kind of influences and maybe take them in and make their lives better because of what we might have to offer. So I always like telling that story because I'm still in touch with that student.
Oh, sure. And why not? That goes back to what I just said a few minutes ago where, just how just one individual person can change the world for the better. And that also fits with the saying, a little goes a long way. Somebody can go from going through something to being inspired, changing their life for the better. And it's all because of great people like you. And, it's like I said earlier, too. I mean, where else are you going to be able to hear people doing stuff like this in stories? But the main point here is touching and impacting lives.
I think one of the biggest influences on our personal stories are the people that impact our lives like that. And it can be
Absolutely.
It can be a negative impact that changes who you are. And It can be a positive impact. And when I was in 3rd grade, I had a really tough teacher. And I was a really rambunctious, energetic kid. It just didn't end there, right? Sure. And she didn't tolerate my energy, so she'd kick me out of class all the time. She got used to me, I'll say it that way. And I loved school, and I loved everything that was happening in school, but in 3rd grade, I was having trouble writing. My brain hadn't put those pieces together yet. And my grades in 3rd grade in writing were terrible. And I was just hoping that 4th grade was going to be better. The summer going into 4th grade, my self-esteem had dropped because of that experience in 3rd grade. And I wasn't feeling very good about myself. And my mom knew that. And, we don't know that our parents are geniuses when we're 9 years old.
Sure. Yeah. Well, like we're the kids. We know everything, right? Yeah.
So one day in the summer, I told my mom I was bored, which was a really big mistake because she would usually hand me a toilet brush or the vacuum cleaner. But that day, she went into a closet and handed me a wooden jewelry box. And I said, "What do you want me to do with that?" Because I wasn't a jewelry kind of girl. And she said, "It's yours." And I said, "Okay, what do you want me to do?" She said, "Honey, I want you to go out every day this summer and I want you to try something new." I said, "All right." She said, "I don't want you to get hurt." I said, "I'll try not to." She said, "Please don't get into trouble." And I said, "I did enough of that in 3rd grade." So I said, "Then what?" She said, "After you try something new, I want you to put an object in this box that reminds you of what you did that day. Bring it home to me at night. Show it to me, and I will try and guess what you were doing." Wasn't she a genius? So I was all excited about challenging my mother every day, so she never knew what I was doing. And the first day of this adventure, I had gone to a friend's who in the backyard there was a tree fort. And that day we were building a platform on the top of it to put another layer on the tree fort. And at the end of the day, I said, "I have to bring something home to my mom." And one of my friends handed me a hammer. I said, "No, that's too easy. She's going to know we were building." And another friend handed me a nail. I said, "No, we need something different." And one of the other friends reached up into the trees and grabbed a pine cone because we were in pine trees and said, "Put that in the box." So that night, my mom says, "Anything in the adventure box?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Are you going to show it to me?" I said, "Yeah." And I put the pine cone in front of her and I said, "Guess what we did?" She said, "Did you go for a walk in the woods?" "No, Mom." "Guess again." "Did you climb a tree?" "Kinda." "Not really." "Guess again." And my brilliant mother said, "Oh, I don't know, honey. Why don't you tell me the story?" Now, I'm 9 years old, right?
Right.
I tell her the story of everything that happened that day, and she said, "Oh, that was a wonderful story." So every night, I would come home with something in this box that summer, and she would never guess because she wanted me to tell her the story. And halfway through the summer, she handed me a notebook, and she said, "I think you're ready to start writing these down. They're really good." And I didn't have Mrs. Benson to worry about, my 3rd grade teacher. So I started writing those stories down. And when I entered 4th grade, I had the box in one hand and the notebook in the other. My 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Stebbins, was an amazing and wonderful teacher. And I said, "I'm a writer." And she said, I'm really glad to hear that, honey. I said, no, you don't get it. In third grade, I was struggling, but over the summer, my mom turned me into a writer. And she read every story in that notebook. And she came back to me and said, you are a good writer. And then she made every fourth grader that year get a box so they could start putting objects in the box that reminded them of some experience they had had, so they would always have story material. So as a little girl, I was really lucky to be influenced by a mother who was caring and knowledgeable and knew what to do with her rambunctious little girl to get her to focus on writing. So that was another influential story. So I like to point out that the people in our lives that impact us greatly may turn our whole lives in a different direction, may cause us to make different choices, may hurt us so that we make different choices, or help us so that we can turn our lives in a new direction and travel down a new path. So it's really important for people who are interested in exploring their own story to ask yourselves, who has impacted my life and why, and how did that change me?
Well, I could definitely not agree with you anymore there. You definitely hit the nail on the head with that, because you take the good with the bad, and as you face all of these different cycles of life that you go through with people and experiences and just different challenges every day. It's what helps you grow. It's what helps you mature. It's what makes you into the person you are. And then it can change your whole entire thought process too. Like you start to develop even a different appreciation for things that, you may not have thought about very much or thought about in a very appropriate way when you were younger. But then as you get older, then you look back and then you were like, gosh, this person or this experience has really inspired me and changed my life. And now I know what I want to do to make my life better and to make others' lives better going into the future. And it's just all about the time of day and the inspiration and even constructive criticism. I mean, it definitely will take you a long way in life. And even though you may not realize it for the time being, it's one of those you'll thank me later moments,
Absolutely. And sometimes we have to be a little bit further down our life continuum to look back at an experience to get a greater perspective or appreciation for what that experience actually gave us. If we're standing right next to an experience that's difficult, it's hard to have that perspective. But if we move down as we get a little bit older and look back and ask ourselves, what did that mean to me? How did it change me? And how did it turn me into the person I am now? Then those stories become tools for growth.
Absolutely. I've done that every day throughout my whole entire adult life, when I'll continue to do that every day. And that's another great reason why being able to have this platform is for me and us at The Way I See It in GTI to be able to encourage other people in the world to do that same exact thing. And, it's all about working as a team and working together. That's what you and I are doing every day. I mean, we don't have to be in the same room to be able to work that happen. I've been working with you all along, and so is Mr. Producer here, Micah, and everybody else here. We're a big happy family, and we're a big team here on The Way I See It, as I've been saying for the past few months now of doing the show. So
you bet.
Yeah,
you bet.
I want to dive deeper into brain science, which you probably did elaborate a little bit on that, but I want to get into more of that with you, because you say that the human brain is wired for story. So could you tell us what you mean by that?
Absolutely. For generations of all time, the human brain has been programmed, if you will, or wired for story. It's our first language. 100,000 years ago, we started telling stories to explain cautionary things or educate the next generation. 27,000 years ago, we started to recognize pictographs and cave drawings. What was important to those people at the time finally had a surface to be expressed on. And then print, the power of print on paper. But storytelling and all of that time is the way that humans have, our brains are wired for language and how we express ourselves. So there's three parts of the brain that simultaneously light up whenever we're listening to a story, telling a story, listening to a podcast, reading a book, watching a movie. Because our brains are wired for story, the first part to light up is what I call our database. So it's our gray matter, our cerebral cortices. So where all our knowledge and experience is stored. When we listen to a story, that part lights up. What do I know about this? Right? At the same time, the oldest part of our brain, the limbic system or the dinosaur part, lights up when we're listening to a story. And that part brings forth our emotions. How do I feel about this? And our memories. Did anything like this ever happen to me? Also back there in that part of our brain is desire and motivation. What does this story make me want to do or not do, right?
Right.
And the final part of our brain that lights up is the part that develops last for humans. That is the prefrontal cortex. And we usually know that part of the brain as sort of our executive function, like I should do this, no, I shouldn't do that. But it's also the part of the brain where we have imagination, creativity, and we're able to visualize. So picture this, listening to a story, and if you could feel it, everything that you know lights up. Bing!
Yeah.
Your emotions light up. Bing! How do I feel? Your memories light up. Bing! That happened to me too. And then you have this beautiful movie screen called the prefrontal cortex that is showing you pictures, actually showing you pictures. So all of that lights up. And what that means is anybody listening to a story has their own version of that story because they have their own knowledge base, their own emotions and memories, and their own way of seeing things. So we can be in a whole room listening to the same story with other people, but every single person in that room is seeing and experiencing a different story. It becomes a personal experience. They bring
Sure.
to it, what they need. So here's the other cool brain science piece that I absolutely love. Last 10, 12 years, neuroscientists have discovered in the prefrontal part of our brain something called mirror neurons. And those mirror neurons light up in that part of our brain whether we are telling a story or listening to one. That part of our brain does not know the difference, Austin, between you and me. So if I'm listening to your story and those mirror neurons start to light up in my brain, I think it's happening to me. A neurotransmitter called oxytocin is released in my brain. Same one that women who have babies.
Oh yeah, yep. I've heard a little bit about that before. It helps you respond and react to different things. But yeah, continue.
A bonding neurotransmitter. So yep. I'm listening to your story. My brain's mirror neurons light up. I release oxytocin, and all of a sudden I have compassion and empathy for your story and your experience in my brain. I think we need to know this part more now than ever because empathy and compassion are needed now more than ever before. And so that means listening to other people's stories with deep listening.
No argument there.
Is really, really important to us as humans right now. So the brain science part makes me very excited, as you can tell. And I started to study the brain science behind storytelling in the early 90s when I was working for a group called the Institute on Media and the Family. And we were trying to warn parents about the dangers of screen time way back then. And we were talking about the ways in which the young brain, 0 to 5 brain, and the adolescent brain, how it responds to too much screen time. And that's when I started to study the human brain on story. And so I use all of that when I'm working with people to help them listen differently and to help them tell their stories differently by thinking about those parts of the brain, thinking about the reaction to stories that those parts of the brain bring to us. And it helps them understand the meaning of stories better. So it's been a great part of the work that I've done, and I add it to just about everything I do. I worked with youth at risk, teens at risk. When I told them it was what was going on in their brain, one of the clients said, "Oh, you mean I'm not responsible then?" I said, "No, that isn't what I mean. Knowing how your brain works makes you more responsible for your story." Right?
Wow, that's a really clever way to put that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just a little tip of the iceberg part of brain science behind what story does for us in our brains.
You're listening to The Way I See It. We're speaking with storyteller Jen Strauss. Stay tuned. We'll be back after this. Hey there, listeners. This is Austin Darga, your host of The Way I See It. If you're enjoying the show and want to support us, why not sponsor an episode? Whether you're promoting a product, service, or brand, this podcast is the perfect place to get your message heard. If you're interested in purchasing a commercial, reach out to my producer, Micah Haven, at mhaven@grandtraversindustries.com. That's all one word, MHAVEN @grandtraversindustries.com. Or you can call Grand Travers Industries at 231-922-4885. That's 231-922-4885 and press 4 for Micah Haven. We're now back to The Way I See It with Jen Strauss. Now, with brain science, we talked briefly before going on here about how you also helped people who are in prison situations tell their story and how much that has impacted their life. Would you like to share a little bit about that experience?
Sure. So that same part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, where the mirror neurons are, doesn't really tell time. So I could tell a story about a traumatic event that happened years ago, and that part of my brain thinks it's happening again. And we don't want to re-traumatize people. We don't want them to experience it that way. And so I coach people who are in difficult parts of their lives to look back at an event, even if it was traumatic, and ask themselves, what did I learn? What was the takeaway? Who am I now because of that? How am I stronger? And the other powerful thing is, because that part of our brain can't tell time, we can actually create stories for our future, tell them in first person, present tense, like they've already happened, and that part of our brain will respond as if that event has already happened. So with people struggling or people who are incarcerated, who are not sure what their futures look like, I have them tell stories about what they want their future to be. So where are you when you get out of prison? Who are you with? What are you doing? Where are you living? And I have them tell me and the groups that we're with those stories so they can feel the reality of that new future potential. And our brains, the more we tell those intentional stories about the future, the greater the chance we're going to realize that intent or that outcome. So it's really powerful for helping people who are trying to change their lives.
Well, sometimes all it takes is a listening ear and a helping hand. I mean, it all goes back to, what we were talking about, what we've been talking about here throughout the podcast. Really amazing and really mind-blowing on how much that can make a difference in people. Yeah. I'll share with you a quick story as well. Back earlier in the summer, we took a little field trip out to our local botanical gardens here. The land where it's located, there's a lot of farming out there, a lot of farmland, and there used to be, for those who aren't locals, there used to be a place here called the State Hospital where people who are struggling with mental health issues go. Unfortunately, that place is closed down. It's no longer there and it no longer exists. But when it was there, the people who were patients there would have opportunities to work out on the farmland, whether it was like working with the cows or dealing with different things out in the fields. And just doing that made them feel a part of something. It made them increase their self-esteem. I think that more people should be encouraged to do that no matter what the situation is, especially if you are struggling with any given situation, whether it's incarceration, whether it's being homeless. There's, all these helplines out there that, you can call for help. But I think there should be more to just that, because I once heard somebody say, it's okay to not be okay. And so you just need to be able to reach out to the right help and the right sources in order to make your life beneficial and show people that you really are worth something at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love the story about the State Hospital and how working with the earth and working with animals was a part of their healing. How wonderful is that?
Well, we definitely are all advocates and lovers of the animals, and we definitely know here on The Way I See It from personal experiences how much that can benefit and impact our lives as well, wholeheartedly.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, you shared with us a story from your experience being a teacher at school, but since being a storyteller, do you have any fond memories of the impact of story of audiences or students that you have helped throughout the years that you'd like to share with us?
Oh my goodness, there's so many. So I had been hired to conduct writing workshops at a high school on the western part of Michigan, on the western shore. I won't say the city.
Okay.
Teachers selected students out of their classes who they thought would either benefit or, I hate to say this, they wanted to get rid of for a couple of weeks. There was a young lady in the workshop who was pretty quiet for the first week, and I do a lot of storytelling with them to get to that writing process. And she was quiet, didn't contribute a whole lot. Her teacher came to me and said, "I'm giving you her. Good luck with this one. You won't get anything out of her." And I said, "Oh, okay, interesting, right?" So for the first week, she really didn't participate. And my mind said, well, maybe this teacher was right. Maybe she's not going to. First day of the second week, I told the students I would always be available at lunchtime. If they wanted to bring me their stories, I would help them with them. And she walked in the door at lunchtime with 13 pages of a story that she had written. And I said, "Tell me about this," because I hadn't heard much out of her, in our workshop. She said, "Well, I have struggled with learning disabilities all my life, and none of my teachers have really understood how to help me." She said, "Especially the one that put me in this workshop. She thinks I'm just lazy, and she thinks I don't want to work." She said, "So I have written a story about how my life is like a river." And in the story, I read it. I made her leave it with me, and I read it. She had compared her life to a river, and how there were times when there were obstacles in the river that she didn't know how to get around, and that she had gotten to a certain point where she had learned how to get around some of those obstacles and get further down the river, and that she felt now that she understood her life a little bit better, and that she knew that there were going to be people who were obstacles to understanding her learning disability. And at the end of the story, she said, "I'm in my own boat now, and I'm paddling just fine." So I took the 13-page story to that teacher of hers, and I said, "I really want you to read this. Perhaps you'll have a different view of this student." And I hope she did. I didn't go back to check on that, right? Mm-hmm. But that story and that student being given the opportunity to be in my workshop, be who she was, participate at the level in which she could, and then come up with this story, an analogy or metaphor of her life as a river, was probably one of the most beautiful experiences that I had with a student in a workshop like that. So,
wow, that's really incredible. And, we here on the Way I See It podcast focus on giving people with disabilities, or as we like to say, differing abilities, the opportunity to share their stories. So is there any, have you ever worked with anyone with a differing ability, whether someone who's nonverbal or autistic, and inspired them to share their story? I know that you kind of talked briefly about it with me as well before coming on here. Would you like to share that particular story?
Absolutely. My favorite stories.
Yeah.
So for the last 12 years, I've been going into classrooms
mm-hmm.
of all ages and all abilities. Differing abilities, I call them my students of all abilities, because everybody has a different way of learning.
Absolutely.
It started off with Arts for All. And when Arts for All ended, Northwest Ed allowed me to continue to go into classrooms. So this will be my 13th year. And I'm with all ages and all abilities. So what I do is I work with the teachers to understand what their students need. And I create stories and activities using puppets and props and PowerPoint images for those who need extra images. And I tell stories. And then also get the students to be able to express themselves in stories. So if they're nonverbal, we use props and I become the narrator. If they're verbal, we have parts that are successful for them to do. We tell stories as groups, and usually, Austin, I choose traditional folk tales, because traditional folk tales tend to have repetition. Things that happen over and over again until a certain outcome. And those stories work really well when you have a whole group of people who have differing abilities for communication. So when you and I first talked, I told you about a student who was totally nonverbal, or so I thought. And we were practicing a play that would be performed on a big stage here in Traverse City, the Milliken Auditorium. And he had his part, and I was the narrator, and he acted his part out really, really well, but he didn't have any words, and that was fine because he was representing the character with his actions and his facial expressions. And we got to the Milliken Auditorium that day, and all the parents were coming to video their students on stage, and the students were really excited about being in a play on a big stage like that, and everybody was getting ready and taking their places and putting on their costumes. And this student saw his mom walk into the auditorium, and he looked up and said, "Mom!
Oh my
You're
God.
here!" And I looked at him and I said, "Where did that come from?" And just started laughing because he did have some verbal abilities, but it wasn't his most comfortable place to communicate, right?
Right.
And for the first time, his mother told me this, his mother was able to film him in a production of a play where he was the star on a big stage. So I've for the last 13 years, it's been my great honor and joy to help students of all abilities to tell stories, to enjoy stories, and to share them with each other.
Absolutely. And a big part in that piece is pushing yourself and challenging yourself to get out of your comfort zone. A lot of these people, I can definitely see how, well, not only have they've made an impact on your life, but you've also made an impact on theirs, and I can definitely tell that now. And every time, it's all about tear-jerking stories, and it's just one of those things that just leaves me speechless for words, because
Ironically.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, oh, that's just truly incredibly amazing for sure. And so with all that being said, like at the end of the day, how does it make you feel knowing that you've made a major impact on people's lives and that you've been able to empower them?
I feel grateful. Not everybody gets to follow a passion in their life and have it be their work. I feel grateful, humbled by the stories that I've heard over the years and the people's courage to share them. And I guess that's it. Grateful and humbled by the work because it's not just me doing this. I offer the tools. And then whoever needs to share their story at whatever level they're sharing it gets to share their stories or participate in a story and then see their lives a little bit differently and then maybe build confidence and be able to walk a little bit differently in the world, understanding that from start to finish our lives are one big story.
Yeah.
And we have the ability to change the way things go. At any given moment in our story, we can choose a different path if we want to. And we have the support to choose a different path and maybe realize a different outcome. So it's been my life's great honor to share stories, but more than that, to help other people find and share their stories.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, all it takes is a little bit of courage, self-esteem, self-confidence, stamina. As I said earlier, a listening ear and a helping hand. If you put all those pieces together, it's a recipe for great success.
Yep, I agree.
Absolutely. Well, before we wrap up here, is there anything that you'd like to say to those out there who have never had the opportunity to be able to express themselves through story, or who have never thought of expressing themselves through story, who may just have like maybe some self-esteem issues, or who are like, I don't think I would be able to do this. How does Jen do it every day? Like what would you like to say to those individuals?
Oh my goodness. So if the desire is there, but the feeling is a little hesitant. Mm-hmm. To find a group. I know there's storytelling groups in just about every community. There's one here in Traverse City called Hearsay, and people are able to take the stage and try a story out. But there's some gentler groups that they're called storytelling guilds, and a lot of communities have a group, usually attached to a library or a library group, where you can go and listen and learn how to tell stories and get support and not have it be a scary stage, right away.
Sure.
I think improv groups are great to build confidence and tell stories, and I know there's improv groups here in Traverse City where you can go play with story and play with interpretation of story and get some instruction and help from the people in that group. Practicing on loving family and friends. So if there's a story that you want to tell, or you think it's an important story in your life, but you're a little afraid to share it, grabbing those people in your life who love you, who support you, who will sit and deeply listen. Mm-hmm. I tell my students sometimes, if you can't find anybody, tell your story to your dog or your cat, because they are loving companions, right? So practicing that story out loud. I always say, if you want to learn your story, get it out of your mouth. Get it out of your mouth many times. And as I did with my students, 5 times to 5 different people, you start feeling comfortable. So those are some of the suggestions I would give.
Absolutely. Well, I can't think of any greater suggestions than that, because I've had that same exact courage and inspiration like you just mentioned. I said once before that one of the greatest fears that people have is public speaking, and sometimes all it takes is to do things step by step. You don't want to leap into something big right away, and everybody, as you mentioned, works differently, and so all you got to do is just take little baby steps at a time, and eventually that strategy or that person or that pet can help you go miles and miles on end until you and you don't always have to reach the top or be at the top to get to where you want to be. It's just all about being yourself, having the right fit for you, and having the right support system, and that's what we advocate for here every day. And I really admire your courage and your path in doing that, Jen. I mean, I can't think of anyone else or anything else that could be more helpful to people. And so kudos on all the great work that you're doing. I hope that you keep it up, and we'll definitely be in touch for sure, whether it be in person on social media, because we definitely, I think that we both need to be able to reach out to more people and as many people as we can. And so where can people learn more about your storytelling and your business, Stories Be Told? All
right. So my website is www.storybetold.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram at Story Be Told. So people can go and learn more about my work website. Facebook, I keep it updated with all my current gigs and programs, my schedule, and then some other interesting things. So they can go there and learn more. And on those sites, they'll be able to connect with me if they want to, or get a hold of me if they want more information.
Perfect. Well, I think you'll definitely see a lot more people on your social media site. Best of luck being able to reach out to some of our listeners, having more customers, Jen. It has been an honor and a pleasure having you here on The Way I See It today. And as I said, keep up the good work, and thank you so much for being here, and keep helping people reach for the stars.
I will, Austin, and you too. This platform is a wonderful platform. So thank you for having the courage to create a podcast that's helping so many people. Thank you, Austin.
Absolutely. That's what we're all about, and we'll keep working together. Thank you for listening to The Way I See It. This podcast is brought to you by Grand Traverse Industries, a Northern Michigan nonprofit whose mission is to fiercely advocate, strengthen, and advance the dignity and opportunity of people with disabilities. Our theme is composed by Nick Vane, and our producer is Micah Haven. We hope you'll join us for our next episode, but in the meantime, this is Austin Darga reminding you that life is a journey. No matter where it takes you, always go where your heart leads you.